Hi, I want to make a video on the subject of perception, psychology, point of view, how you view things and how you disconnect yourself and how recognizing and coming to a conclusion about the reality that we're living in and how that can change your perception and how it can alter your recognition, and it can change your understanding and almost make yourself come to sort of a depressing conclusion about everything that's happening around you, and a lot of it has to do with your projections of value and how everything that you're doing is just a projection of value. Every time you see something, every time you do something, it's just a projection of value. You're interacting with something in the environment, and then you're interacting with it in some way, but that's it. It's just a simple interaction. You're interacting with something, the same thing, and you're just interacting, nothing beyond that. You're touching something, you're feeling something, you're seeing something, you're feeling that one-on-one relationship with something. You feel like, well, if you say something like you want to beat someone up, you feel that one-to-one relationship when you lay your fist into their face, or whatever it may be, your foot to their nutsack, or something like that. And sort of like if you pick up a pencil and draw something, or you pick up an instrument and play it, or you get on the computer and you feel like you're interacting with something on the computer, and how really it's just your projection. It's an interaction and something that ethereal. It's ethereal, like something on the computer. You're only interacting with, say, a mouse and not the interaction with the computer. You're seeing it and you're interacting with it, but it's just an altering of your perception, and it's nothing more, nothing less. It's an altering of your own perception. It matters because it's something that's changing. It's changing something. That's really all that's happening. And every time you touch something, you're just changing some kind of point of view, because that's the only thing that matters, is the perceptual changes, the things that happen inside of your head, and how you perceive things, and how you emotionally respond to things and things like that. What I really wanted to get onto is this idea of noticing the disconnection. Once you realize it's just a projection, that perception of understanding that you're just projecting value onto something, and how that can have an effect on you emotionally and perceptually in and of itself, creating some kind of strong dissonance where you're comfortable but you're not very comfortable, and you're feeling this agitation and understanding. You're still enjoying what you're doing, if you're doing something you enjoy or satisfying something, but you're not really feeling it. You're not feeling it. You're not involved in the narrative. Sort of like a piece of music, listening to some kind of music, or looking at something and creating a whole narrative. Like you can walk inside a picture, or you can walk inside a painting, or you can, every time you hear a piece of music that you like, or whatever it may be, using examples like that, where you feel like there's something more to it. You create a narrative. You feel like there's something inside of it, that you could walk inside of it and have some kind of an infinite landscape, where you have this perception of what this song or this piece of art, or this perception, or looking over at the trees, looking over at the forest, creating this imagery in your head where there's something more to it. It's all just it's an image in your head, and obviously it's more of a white kind of washy gray space, white space, or whatever it may be that we create, where we create some kind of perception of something more, the perception of something more beyond that, and something where we almost stupefy ourselves so that we can see something more, even if we don't necessarily think there's something more, but it's usually that we're just caught up in the game. Yeah, we're caught up in the game, and those are the 2 points I want to make, is about this perceptual thing. I think I touched on this earlier in another video I made, but it's about perceiving things, and you're perceiving more than really is. Sort of like I said, I think in another video, where there's like a beam of light, and in the beam of light, there's nothing more to the beam of light. You may have all this perception surrounding, like there's something more to it. You have all these things surrounding this idea, like a beam of light. It creates all sorts of ideas in your head, and perceptions, and some kind of perception of beauty and satisfaction, and something more, something greater, something beyond that. But see, you're going to constantly be chasing that beyond and beyond and beyond. Doesn't matter. It's all about a perception. It's right in front of your eyes. You see exactly what it is. There's nothing more to it. Obviously, noticing all the details and understanding it and putting a label on it is obviously something. And noticing if it's dangerous or not, noticing all these, having all these details is nice. But what you're saying is what you're saying. If you feel it, you can feel it, but there's nothing more than that feeling and the perception and what you see and these senses that you use to understand these things. Same thing, like I said, with a piece of music. You're hearing it and you're applying it to your emotions, and you feel the emotions. And when you hear a powerful piece of music, it's usually something that's very emotional and has a nice hook to it and a nice melody and stuff like that, and usually create some kind of bigger image, some kind of greater understanding of something. You create a bigger picture of something, right? You create a bigger landscape where you can put that and apply the piece of music to or the piece of art to, and you say, there's something here, there's something more. I can see a whole landscape, a whole land covered in this piece of music. There's something here. I can dive in the music and see something more, an eternal world where I can live and hearing the music in the background, but that's it. It's just music in the background. It's just something happening, some noise happening in the background, and it's interacting with our senses, and it's having, based on the sentience that we're feeling, it's making us feel something, interact with it. And all it is just brain noise mixing with outside noise and creating an interaction, and that's all it is an interaction, unfortunately. But it still means something. You could still create it in your head. It can still mean something, but once you recognize there's nothing more than what's happening in your head, that kind of creates an emptiness. Sort of like back to the other point I want to make, when it comes to like interacting with things, having this whole narrative, the old narrative idea of things pushing you forward, the momentum that pushes you forward. This interaction that we're having, where all we're doing is moving forward, movement, interacting with other movement. There's no real cause and effect. We're not necessarily satisfying our desires. We're just moving forward until we die, and that's what creates the meaning, right? Whatever meaning we have, the meaning of feeling something, the sentient being, the sentient thing, experiencing something, and not only that, how the state of the existence, but also the fact that you die and everything you do creates an inevitable end, and the whole ideas of infinite life and things can come into another conversation. But I want to touch on the whole conversation. I want to go back to the idea that I didn't finish yet, which is this emptiness that you feel based on the narrative that you used to have, this stupefying yourself to an idea of narrative, applying yourself, pushing yourself forward, feeling it inside you, the butterflies, feeling all these things, engulfing yourself in something. But once that's gone, once you recognize, once you perceive, there's nothing more. There's nothing more to it than perception. And once that perception's been breached, there's nothing more. You can start to feel. I keep on going back to the word, but it's an emptiness. That's all you're feeling. Feeling. That's all you're recognizing. You're recognizing. I don't want to speak for you, but it's the idea that once you realize what everything is, you don't get involved in the narrative. I'm just trying to make sure I remember exactly the perception I'm trying to point out, where you're not caught up in the same way. You're not seeing everything, and it goes back to the idea of something beyond something, feeling like there's something inside of something, inside of something, inside of something. It's sort of like the Russian dolls, where you take it out and there's something inside of something. You open it up, and then there's another doll inside it, and you keep on opening them. It's like that, where you constantly feel like there's something more, and something more, and something more. You can keep going smaller and smaller and smaller. And to an extent, that's kind of true, but obviously there's these barriers that surround us. These barriers, like, there's a barrier to my hand, or to any kind of other thing. And this barrier, even if there's something going inside of something, there's still a barrier here that signifies an end and a beginning. This is the end and the beginning. There's a barrier here, and things can only get so small to a point in recognizing that they can't go outside this barrier. It doesn't matter how small things can get, to a point it makes it irrelevant once you know there's a barrier that creates that. So no matter how small things get, there's still a barrier, and that almost makes the idea of how infinitely small things can get, even applying that word infinite, how small things can get at all, even the idea makes it irrelevant. It's not even important. But yeah, the Russian doll thing, things get, there's more, you keep on thinking there's more behind the door, more behind the veil, there's something, keep on looking that applies this kind of infinite feeling of, constant movement, momentum, even though that's what we're doing. There's nothing more than perception that we keep fooling ourselves with projection. And once you breach that perception, once you recognize it, once you look past it, there's nothing more than just air. Nothing more than just the same old perception fooling us, or looking beyond that perception. and applying to this narrative, making it seem whimsical, seeming like there's fantasy behind it. And it's, yeah, like a fantasy, looking in a fantasy and thinking there's something more to it that drives us forward, to think that there's something behind another curtain, but it's just going to lead to another curtain. That's the only thing behind the curtain, is another curtain. Once you look behind that one curtain, there's just another curtain to look behind, and you're just going to keep finding curtains behind each curtain. There's nothing more. But it's always the idea of moving. It's the idea of pushing forward, momentum pushing us forward towards something. And that's all that's driving us, is this momentum that's pushing us towards something, to finding something new. But the new thing is always the same thing, like eating is the same thing. It's the same process. It doesn't matter what you eat. It's just a matter that you're satisfying the eating. And once you eat, looking back, it doesn't matter what you ate. You just satisfy. And really, we're looking at it on a simple level like that. That's all we're doing, is satisfying these crude desires that we have based on our own biology, forcing us into these desires because we were forced into this existence against our will, and against our will we're subjected to these things where we're desiring things against our will. But without these desires, without the possibility for some kind of deprivation, there would be no meaning to this existence that we're living. And that goes back to the idea that, without this deprivation, life wouldn't really have much of anything driving us forward. Because you can't just live in a happy state. It's all about the relative state of being, where you have to go in a negative state first to be in a positive state. But that negative state that you experience, to get the greater the positive state, you have to get the greater negative state based on that. The spring movement, where you have to be in a negative state first to be in a positive state. Just eliminating deprivation makes life have meaning, but also takes away the want to have an existence, because you have to go through all those negatives to get to the positives. But the thing is we're constantly driven forward to live and move, and there's going to be an end. And if anything that superficially at least creates some kind of meaning, everything has a meaning, but then again, everything's going to go away anyway. It's going to disappear. It doesn't matter in the end. But it does matter to us, and just because, something doesn't matter in the end to the outside world, to me, once I die, once anyone else dies, it doesn't matter to them anymore. Their life still mattered to them when they were alive, even if they're dead, not experiencing anymore. To them, they're still existing. It mattered to them when they were existing, and once they're dead, it's irrelevant at that point. But when they were existing, the only time that they are aware, and things do matter, it did matter to them. And from the outside perspective, when there's other human beings there, or whoever other living creatures, it matters even after you're dead, and it mattered even after you're dead, even if no one was there. Because you'd still suffer, the experiencing you had still existed. It doesn't matter if it's all swiped away, it still mattered, it still happened. Even hypothetically speaking, if I lived in a previous life, it still happened to me, even if I can't recollect it. It still mattered. Sort of like, having some kind of amnesia. It still mattered what caused the amnesia. You can have had a brain tumor or something. It still mattered, even though you can't remember it. It still mattered. It still caused something. You still experienced something, even if you can't recall. It doesn't matter if you remember or not. So yes, I think I covered those points good enough, and I want to make sure I get on the point one more time, how everything's just a projection. Or just projecting things, or perception, onto something else. And once you recognize it's just a projection, if you let that control you for just a little bit, and you let it take control a little, I think, at least from my point of view, from my experience, you start recognizing exactly that it doesn't mean anything beyond your projection, and you're not caught up in a narrative that you used to think about the curtains, the infinite regressing curtains, or the curtains that finally leads to your demise, right? So once you die, it doesn't matter, but it does matter what you experience, but you still matter, and the effect you had still matters, as long as there's living things, but what you experience still matters, even if there's nothing else. But from your point of view, it doesn't matter anymore, but it did matter. But once you're dead, it doesn't matter. You keep going, and you're dead. And yeah, sort of like the curtain thing, it leads to an end. There's no infinite curtains. There's just a curtain, and finally there's a curtain that leads to nothing. You just black out, and you're gone. And that's the thing that drives us forward, is this momentum to keep moving. And we just apply these psychological games to keep us moving forward, and eventually, obviously, not to necessarily move us forward, but get us through the day, but to constantly keep moving. And it's just something that that we do by nature. We just constantly apply these different characteristics and these applications. We apply different things to the existence that we're living in. And like back to the example where I said the piece of music, yes, we're just applying some kind of narrative to the piece of music. I feel like there's some kind of veil, but I've had this perception where it's just music. It's just sound waves moving into my ears and at different frequencies and so on and so forth. And it's moving, and you almost have an image like some kind of blackness, right? And you imagine someone singing in the background at some kind of stage. There's an origin to that, and it's going to be coming from a speaker. It can be coming from someone's voice or an instrument, but that's where it's coming from. There's nothing more. It's just an idea based on some kind of music or some kind of art piece. There's an origin. It came from a piece of paint moving. It's just a bunch of little paint things. When you individually break it down, sort of like the human body, you can individually take these pieces apart, sort of like surgery and taking your heart out and still live and getting a heart replacement or whatever it may be. Taking the appendix out, it's something else. It's all of a sudden something different. We can be broken apart. And like a piece of music or a piece of art, it's just different little things, little pieces put together into a whole. Regardless of the level that you look down and reduce it to, say an atomic level or whatever it may be, photonic level or whatever you want to call it. It's just these different pieces and different configurations as a whole. Well, sort of like that. It doesn't mean it's not a whole. Like my body's a whole. It works in conjunction with everything else in my body, usually speaking, right? I think. I'm moving, and everything's still moving based on the central nervous system. Yeah, there's an origin to these things, and creating this narrative where there's something more, you're applying something more to a voice and a piece of music, creating this, melody, or a piece of art, creating this perception of something more to it. But there's nothing more to it. It's just that. And there is something more because our psychology is part of this reality. We can apply it, but once you recognize the application and where it's coming from, you start recognizing for what it really is, and it's nothing more than you just projecting value into something. And that's all you're doing. And there's nothing more to it. But you can still live in it, right? It doesn't matter if you recognize it, you can still live in it. And that's another point. You can live in it even if you recognize the truth. You just don't bring the fantasy that you want to indulge into a philosophical discussion. So regardless of that, there's nothing more to it. Just make sure you can still live in your fantasy, even if you're talking philosophy and talking the truth. You can accept the truth and still live in a fantasy. Sort of like you can still find enjoyment in life. You can still get caught up in life more in that kind of way. And still find life reprehensible and find it completely obnoxious and silly and pointless. You can still find it. You can still get caught up in it. And I think that's all I want to say. I don't want to go on too long. It's already 18 minutes, and I don't want to go on too long so no one watches this video. But I think I made my points clear enough. Maybe not the best, but I think I made them good enough. Yeah, so anyway, thank you, and until next time, goodbye.